You've heard probably of this term, fight or flight. Yes, fight or flight. It's like if you find yourself in a bear attack, some people will fight the bear, and other people will run away from the bear. They've added two new ones now. I don't know if you know this or not. Now it's not just fight or flight, but some people will freeze, and I don't know, hope the bear doesn't see them. And this new one, the newest of the new ones, is called fawn, which makes the least amount of sense to me. Some people will compliment the bear and fawn over the bear in hopes that the bear is distracted. Oh, what adorable claws you have. Look at your button nose. And the bear just doesn't know what to do, and peace is here. Our fight or flight responses, our way of preserving our life, they don't always make sense. They were really useful getting us here, but after a while, they seem kind of strange. Both Kristen and I have family in the Nashville area, and so we have made many 16-hour drives to the great Middle Tennessee area, and something always happens in about central Arkansas, something catastrophic. Sometimes, there's a tornado warning there, and we've got to, navigate and pull over into a questionable gas station. But sometimes it's just the very aggressive drivers of central Arkansas. I'm just being descriptive, okay? And this brings about my wife and I's respective fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. I have permission to tell the rest of this story. One day, we were driving, and there was a particularly aggressive maneuver made by a child of God in the right-hand lane as I was trying to pass them. And it felt for about 5 seconds like there was a certain inevitable crunch of metal that was about to happen with our front right bumper and their back left bumper. And I look over, and my wife covers her ears. And when all was said and done, I don't know why, but the covering of the ears annoyed me. And I said, "What did you think you were going to do by covering your ears?" And she said, "I didn't want to hear it." And I thought, in the case of a bear attack, I guess it's just good to not be able to hear anything as the bear attacks you or as you get into a car crash. I think that I might have use of my arms because my response is fight. And I'm not proud of that. It's not inherently better than freeze. As my wife devastatingly pointed out a moment later, she said, "I couldn't help but notice that you aggressively sped up and got shoulder to shoulder with the child of God in the car next to us and aggressively made eye contact like that was going to somehow help us. What were you thinking you were going to do?" I said, "I wanted him to know." "What did you want him to know?" "I wanted him to know that I knew." "Knew what?" "I don't know." But man, he knows not to mess with anymore because I looked him in the eye. It's nonsense, right? It makes no sense. The things that have helped us survive up to a certain point in our lives start to seem silly after a while. This inevitably happens. The things that have got us here can't take us any further. If you remember last week, the men on the boat, the church on the boat, they're bailing out water. They're trying to do everything they can to help the boat in the Sea of Galilee survive this great storm, and all of the tactics that they had learned about saving themselves up to that point no longer worked. And so they turned to Jesus, who stands up and calms the wind and the waves. And the people in the boat, the church in the boat, are terrified because now they know what real power is. We're following a collection of stories here in the Gospel of Mark. We think about them as concentric circles, starting out big and getting smaller and smaller and smaller and more and more focused. In the first story last week, we see that Jesus has power over creation, the cosmos, the whole universe. He's the one who can say to the wind and the waves, "Peace, be still," and they obey him. And now we have landed in a place that is called the other side of the Sea of Galilee, the land of the Gerasenes. And it's not exactly clear what this is, because the maps that we have where there's a town called Gerasene isn't really that close to the Sea of Galilee. But it is a Greek word, it's a Roman word. And then there at the end of the story, we have mention of the 10 cities, the Decapolis. And what we know is Jesus has arrived on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He is no longer in Jewish country. And in the Jewish imagination of the ancient world, there are only two types of people and two places: Jewish and non-Jewish, Jew and Gentile. They have landed in the non-Jewish part of the cosmos. And so now we have a story, as Mark tells it, where we have gone from the cosmos to everything but where we live, because Mark's original audience was almost certainly mostly Jewish. And so now they have landed in the part of the world that we don't know so well, the part of the world where our folks aren't so invited. And in stories to come, we're going to get even closer. We're going to get on the margins of the Jewish society. And we are going to go all the way, Mark has us in concentric, smaller and smaller, more focused circles to Jerusalem itself and the temple and the very power, the seat of power in the Jewish world. And I think it's really helpful to think about those concentric circles not just as narrowing and becoming more and more focused, but becoming more and more challenging. We might think that control over the cosmos might be the most challenging. But those of us who have had any sort of family conflict or conflict with those we love the most know that it is the ones closest to you that is hardest to have conflict with. It is the ones closest to you where it is most difficult for you and they to actually change. And so Mark has Jesus going to the place that will become most difficult to change, the very seat of power. But not yet. Now, we've just landed in that other world, that other place. And it's almost laughably Roman. Like, it's not really obvious to us as we read this here in 2025, but the Romanness, the Greekness of where they have landed is a ridiculous, absurd. It's over the top. It's hyperbole. They've landed in a place where there are unclean people living in tombs. The people there are not following the Jewish cleanliness code. Why would they? But it's just so unclean. He lives in tombs, and there's pigs all around. Ew. 2,000 pigs are living there, and these details keep getting added and added and added, and you just see the good Jewish boys getting off the boat going, "Oh, yeah, what are we doing? How long are we going to be here, Jesus?" And that's when it gets really, really dirty, because then the man, not with a sickness, right? Not with a mental disorder, not with a personality, a man with an unclean spirit rushes out to Jesus. There's a lot of ink spilled over what sort of problem this man has. Modern readers of this psychologists want to say he's probably schizophrenia. It's probably multiple personality disorder. Mark doesn't have that word. He doesn't have that research. I think it's probably not totally wise to completely separate whatever's going on with this man with things we don't understand, with elements of the spiritual world that make us unclean, that make us not right, not what we want to be. I don't understand them. We live in such a hyper-rational world, such a scientific world, that we want to rush to putting a scientific label on things. I think that's probably a mistake. I think that's probably reading ourselves into the story a little bit too much. I want us to keep this mystery. What's he got? We don't know. It doesn't matter. It's making him miserable. It's keeping him from relationship, from friendship. That's what matters. The man runs out of the tombs. He runs out of the tombs where he has presumably, again, escaped being bound by those who are trying to keep him away from society. And like all other supernatural elements in the Gospel of Mark, he immediately recognizes Jesus for who he is. He says, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. A label that Jesus in Mark never gives himself. We've talked about this messianic secret in Mark where Jesus will never refer to himself as the Son of God, but will always, always, always leave it up to the reaction of the people who see him to identify it, choosing instead this label for himself, the Son of Man, the human being, the one from the prophet Daniel who will come and defeat the big, scary kings of the world. But just a man, just a person. But the demoniac, the man with unclean spirit, he knows, or that which within him knows. He runs to Jesus and he says to him something very telling. Don't torment me, please. Because, of course, that's all he's known. The only intervention that he has experienced has been for him torment. It's not really in the story, but we can imagine there's some clues that this has built up, this has escalated. The man doesn't start so completely out of his mind that he's a threat to himself and those around him. He starts off maybe just a little bit off. Maybe those who are around him try to get him some help, try to figure out whatever first century version of a family intervention might be. It doesn't work. So they put a little bit more boundaries on him. They put a little bit more borders around him, a little bit more walls of protection around him and others. That doesn't work. He breaks through those boundaries. So they tie him up. They put chains on him. That which is within him is so tormenting and so powerful and so difficult that he breaks the chains as he cuts himself and he howls all day and all night. I mean, the man's in pain. The man is in deep pain, and nothing will hold him back. So much so to the point where Jesus lands in this place. He is being locked by chain and key in tombs where they put dead bodies. You cannot get more removed from community, society, friendship, and family than this man. And so when Jesus comes to him, he has this strange conversation with him where he just bargains, almost makes a deal with the man about where his unclean spirits go. Evidently, they've got to go somewhere. And it is when the swine run into the sea, when the swine kill themselves running into the sea, that I think we can develop a sense of compassion for the man who has been holding all of that inside of himself, who has been struggling with that massive destructive power that when it goes somewhere else, it destroys it. So then the man is there, and time in Mark is a weird thing. How much time has passed, we don't know. But the man is discovered eventually by the people who know him, the people who have bound him, his tormentors. And the word is found of his right mind. And this is an interesting word. I think we have a slide for this word. This word in Greek, I know that it's 2 weeks in a row I've done this now, I'm sorry, but the word in Greek is an important word. It's sophisune. Sophisune. So from a couple of different words, one of which is Sophie, which is the ancient Greek word for wisdom. And it's one of these words in another language that's so important to that language that there's really not an adequate translation. Like ennui in French, right? Well, there's not really a way we can translate that. It's just so built into the culture that you have to kind of understand the whole culture to understand it. For 2,000 years before Jesus, the rock stars of the Greek and Roman world have been talking about this word. Aristotle, Plato, Sophocles, Pericles, they've all been talking about sophisune. It has been their shared goal. So it can get translated as what is rational or discretion or wisdom, modesty. I like according to the right measure best. It is the word that encapsulates all of the things that the ancient philosophers are after. How to live well. How to live well. There's certain philosophers that come along and just say, hey, life's short. Take what you can get and have as much pleasure as possible. And then after a while, they realize that seeking pleasure for yourself and just constantly pouring into yourself, that creates pain, ironically. Creates pain in yourself and others. And so they realize that that's actually not wise. That's not sophisune. And sophisune, that living life the best way, is this measure, the right measure. How much to give for myself? How much to give for others? What's my mind doing when a bear attacks? Am I still reacting out of this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response? Am I still doing the things that I did as a child, or have I grown into some sort of wisdom so that I can learn how to live well? I don't think it is coincidence that the one and only time this word is used in the Gospel of Mark is when Jesus finds himself in the Greco-Roman world. The man who was locked by chain and key in the tombs for the dead has become the embodiment, the enfleshment of everything his culture strives for. He has become sophisune, the opposite of sophisune. Next slide there. Mania. That's the opposite word of sophisune. Living insane ways. The maniac, the demoniac of the tombs has been made by Jesus. The pinnacle, the epitome of everything his culture has strived for more than 2,000 years. He has been found of his right mind. And then the story gets strange. Those people who saw Jesus sitting next to the man who was of his right mind, of his sound mind, do you have any prediction of what emotion they felt? Do you remember? They were afraid. They were afraid. It is so interesting to me how it's such a common response in Mark's gospel for that when people see the power of Jesus, their response is immediately to be afraid. Perhaps we don't yet trust Jesus to be fully God and fully human. Maybe we see somebody with so much power and we think, that's kind of scary for some one person to have such power. But maybe it's that we're still so in love with the status quo of our society that realizing somebody who has the power to come and change it is just terrifying. What has got us here will not take us any further. And look, these people, they've got a good reason to be afraid. Jesus has, in an instant, become quite bad for their business, right? 2,000 swine died in a moment. That's not good for the local economy. And so they beg Jesus, please leave. Please leave. And what does the man do? He begs Jesus, take me with you. They're never going to understand me. They're the people who have sent me here. They have tormented me. But Jesus does this amazing thing. He does not need to be the local hero of the Decapolis. And so he gets in the boat and he leaves. He does not need to change these people's minds. He does not need to be a Messiah for them that they have thought of, that they've preconceived of. And he does not need to change this man to bring him out of the community in which he was born. So often we think that the way forward in conflict and irreconcilable differences is we're just going to give that person some space. We're just going to give them some space and time will heal things. We think that physical distance heals emotional pain. It never does. It never, ever does that. It only creates more boundaries, more walls, more time where there's more pain to develop. The ways that we have learned to do conflict, the things that have been successful for us in the past, will not take us any further. Jesus does not build barriers. Jesus builds bridges. And the part of this story that is, to me, so amazing, more amazing than 2,000 legion spirits being sent into swine, more impressive than Jesus healing the winds and the waves, is the way that Jesus restores this man to his society. It seems with all the othering that is happening lately, with all of the division, that we just think we're just going to give people some space. We're going to give family members some space who maybe say inappropriate things at the Thanksgiving dinner table. We're going to give them some space and some time. That'll fix it. Jesus heals this man by bringing him back together with the very people who have hurt him. And he says, no, you can't come with me. You tell them about me. And the demoniac, who has suddenly become Sophe-Sune, is the one who goes to the 10 cities and tells them about Jesus, and they are amazed. He becomes the hero. He becomes the one who is the bearer of hope to his community, no longer ostracized, no longer scapegoated. The hero, the Sophe-Sune. And Jesus gets on a boat and never goes back to the Greek-speaking world. Because Jesus doesn't build barriers, he builds bridges. And the way that Jesus is able to heal the cosmos and the world and the Greek-speaking world is not to bound somebody and to torment somebody and to keep them away, but to say, no, through the power of God, I am going to bring you together because it is drawing near to each other that will fix our problems. It is drawing near to each other, even though it hurts, that will resolve the conflict that we have yet to be able to resolve. And so I want us to close this time, this lesson, by a spiritual practice here. I want us to spend about 3 minutes in silence. I'm going to give you something specifically to pray about together. I'm wondering if we can be the Sophe-Sune of our world. Can we be the ones that bring wisdom and rationality and the right measure? Can we be the people that draw near to the ones causing conflict, not by othering those who would other, not by being hateful to the ones who would share hate, but drawing near to them, fighting for their humanity, not praying that somebody would lock them up and throw them in a tomb, but drawing near by the power of Jesus to heal and build bridges. So here's what I want us to do. There's this form of prayer that I've learned from a man named Richard Foster, who's written a lot about prayer in the church. Richard Foster talks about this way of praying for your enemies that uses your imagination. You know, sometimes when I pray for my enemies, I'm like, oh. It's kind of like the driver that almost ran me off the road in Central Arkansas. I hope he knows. I hope he knows what he's done wrong. I don't think that's what Jesus means by praying for your enemies. Instead, can you imagine prayerfully the best possible thing for their life? Not some fantastical, that they would win the lottery, no, what's the most realistic, positive thing? What's the next most likely blessing God could give that person? And what would it look like for me to draw near to them? There's not a request there, right? Our spirit prays so deeply that it's beyond words. This is its own request. Can you imagine for the next 3 minutes the best possible outcome for someone who is currently causing you frustration or pain, or somebody who has distanced themselves from you, or someone you just find slightly annoying? Can we do away with the fight, flight, or freeze responses that got us here and say there's going to be a way forward, a more Christ-like way forward? And maybe the way that we participate that, the way that we become imitators of Christ is to start building bridges instead of putting up barriers. For the next 3 minutes, in prayer, ask yourself, what is the best thing that could happen for that person? How can they become Sophe Sune? As we enter this time of silence, receive this blessing. May the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ go with you this week wherever he may send you. May he guide you into the wilderness. May he protect you in the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at all the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again to these doors.